All right, and welcome again to today's Survivor Circle. Pleased again to welcome John Michael and his guest, Ronald Howie. And John Michael, I will turn it over to you. Welcome to you both.
Well, thank you, Becky, again for this platform and for inviting us here. It's exciting. I am so excited to have Ronald Howie here today because every time Ronald and I have ever spoken, we never know where it's going to go. It is the most in-depth and most empowering is the word I want to say today with him. And I always leave the conversation feeling twice as good as I did when I started. So please let me welcome Ronald Howie. Would you like to say hi to everybody before we start, Ronald?
Hi there. Thank you for that welcome, John Michael. Let's see what the next hour brings.
I'm ready. I'm so ready. Well, why don't we just start off and having you introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your background story so everyone knows where you're coming from. And we could talk about your horses. You know, we have to talk about the horses somewhere along the line today. And there's so many other things I want to talk about, swimming in the ocean and all this other stuff. But I'm going to turn it over to you and let you share what you feel comfortable sharing, and we will go from there.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that introduction. And where to start? Trauma seems to have been part of my life for such a long time. I think for me, everything is about post-traumatic growth. I had probably the most significant trauma that I had was when I was windsurfing, age 29, and I had a bleed on the brain that wasn't picked up, and went through a recovery process that really has been ever since then. But that was sort of almost the catalyst to then finding out more and more about this world of what is the effect of trauma. I completed a PhD just over a year ago in natural healing and nutrition. And I suppose I'm dedicated to helping others really transmute the trauma, these horrific experiences that shape our lives, to enable them to find the type of life and fulfillment that I really believe is there for us. Nobody wants to go through trauma, but it is an opportunity. And I think if you'd said that to me at various times in my life, I'm not a violent man, but I might have hit you at that point. So it's getting to that point, and it is a lifelong journey. And I have gone through physical trauma, as I mentioned. I've gone through childhood trauma. I've gone through sexual trauma. I've gone through trauma that is very difficult and painful to still to talk about. Yet, there is growth. There is opportunity. There is happiness. Out of all of that darkness, hope exists.
I love your constant message of always hope. Every time we talk again, you bring that in with everything, and I think that's what makes you so unique and so valuable for people to hear. One thing I like to address right away is we talk about trauma. And I think a lot of people who go through certain types of trauma want to make sure that their trauma is being identified and focused on. But you have said in the past, and heard on your talks and everything, it doesn't matter what the trauma is trauma. And can you lead a little bit more about that?
Sure. It matters to me as an individual what that trauma is. But post-traumatic growth, I suppose let's step back a stage. Trauma is anything that is traumatic to me, anything that disturbs my life in a way that I am unable to integrate. And I could go into great depth about how the brain and the central nervous system actually work. But essentially, when we are unable to process something, that is, we are experiencing trauma. And that trauma starts to affect our lives. And often, for so many people, that is in childhood. not just sexual abuse, but very few children are given the support and the love that they actually need to be nurtured to develop into the adults that they are destined to be. And I think sometimes this trauma comes along and it disturbs our life. And at that point, if we can find the support to say, look, I know that this is awful. I know you may not even want to look at it. But over time, with loving care and support, you can start to view it in a different light. Your body can start to process it. You start to find that you move on to a different path. And if I give you an example in my own life, you know, I was 29 years old when I had my brain injury. I was running a software business. It was a startup business. And we had just gone through some of the most horrendous financial problems in one of the worst recessions this country had seen. But we had come out the other side. I just had, my son was 6 weeks old. I was thrilled. I was a father. Life was looking good. But I wasn't listening. And I wasn't listening to my body. And my body actually said, mate, you're on the wrong path here. You are not a businessman. This is not the way forward for you. And so I went through this trauma. If you told me that at the time, I'd have locked you up. But that was 30 years ago. So I have 30 years of experience of looking, exploring, and I've explored around the world with trauma, both for myself, helping friends and family, helping clients, helping animals. Trauma exists in our world. So once we start to accept that trauma exists in our world, that if I feel it is trauma, it is trauma. We know the body has this innate wisdom. And what's happened is we are part of an economic system that says we must produce this, we must do this, we must do that. And everybody has very busy lives. And the body says, well, hang on a minute, what about me? What about listening to my needs? And when you start to do that, when you start to hear the space between the words, you start to hear the body, the soul, the heart, the consciousness. And it's such a humbling place. Now, I would not have this experience to share had I not gone through the trauma. Had I not had a neurosurgeon looking at the MRI scan when I collapsed 3 weeks after I'd hit my head, saying, oh, you had a bleed on the brain. You were either going to die or recover. We should have had you in hospital and drilled a hole in your head. You know, the anger that you feel, the resentment, the denial, the amount of times I tried. After that point, I kept trying to go back to software. I went back to that business. I ended up running 3 other software businesses because I still wasn't listening. But gradually over time, I started to pause and hear my body. So I would say to anybody listening, it's real. And honor it. And as you start to honor it, you will start to hear the path of healing that your body, your unique body in 8 billion people knows what it needs. It knows exactly what it needs, when it needs it. But our mind goes, no, I don't need to rest now. I could name, after my brain injury, I could name 50 different types of headaches. I'm going like 50 types. Yeah, I could list them now. I got reduced to a darkened room for 3 hours at a time. If you come in my door and said, oh, this is a great experience for you, it's just like, what? but I can look back and go, right, okay, I was unable to listen because I'm conditioned into being part of, I'm a businessman. I come from 5 generations of people running their own business. So that's what I do. The idea of actually giving and sharing in the health profession it just wasn't in our family's background. So it doesn't come in mine. And somehow I get knocked out of it. And for me, trauma is simply trapped energy. That is what it is. And we get this choice. Do I deny it and suppress it, which takes energy? Or do I start to say, look, this is free energy that I can mine. This is my energy. This is my birthright. This is who I am. And whether it's a perpetrator or somebody who has an unfortunate accident, that is energy that is waiting to be released. And I've gone through multiple different traumas. The last of which 2 years ago, I was reduced to a wheelchair, bladder and bowel incontinent. And still, I remember I woke up in hospital and they didn't think I would survive. My family didn't think I would survive. And I had no memory of 10 days. But I woke up and my first thought was, I can heal this. I was virtually paralyzed. I was in hospital for 5 months. But I had more laughs, particularly in the rehab hospital, for 4 months than I'd done in the previous decade, because people were saying yes to life. So however dark it is in your life right now, there really is hope from somebody who knows and who understands. This isn't a theory. This is my life.
It's amazing. There's so many things to unpack in that statement that you just gave, and I'm just gonna dive in and see how are you doing right now? You're okay?
One thing I can always guarantee with you, John Michael, as you say, it goes in directions I can never anticipate. As much as I have dwelt and prayed and thought about our conversation today, the emotion is real. I feel the energy of the people that you are humbly serving, that I am humbly part of. I feel their need and I feel their energy and I feel the despair and I feel the hope. And I know what I have battled. And I just want to send love and support to anybody that listens. I'm with you.
Appreciate that, and I thank you, and that was beautifully stated. And I just want to like go back a little bit and think about you're talking about it doesn't matter what the trauma is for whoever it is. It's the way they interpret that trauma, which becomes trauma, is what I think I heard you see it. I said, and also that the body is aware of this trauma. And we here, I know in the States, are conditioned, which is the word you used as well, is not to listen to those things, but to reach outside and get all the quick solutions that are out there. How can we learn to listen to our body and not be so influenced by what is coming into us from the media, from everybody else? I mean, you turn on the TV and how many medical commercials do we see here in the States? It's almost at least one every hour, if it's not two every hour, and they just start telling us, and I can see people just start thinking, oh, that's what I need, that's what I need, that's what I need, instead of trying to find out what they really need. And from what from our past conversations, you've had this incredible ability to go within yourself and listen to your body to find out what you needed. Even though everyone is telling you what you need, you were able to hear what you needed. Can you talk a little bit about that and how can we learn to listen more to our bodies opposed to what we think everybody else is telling us?
It's a great question. I can listen to my body simply because I didn't. is the very short answer. What I haven't explained to people listening is that when I went windsurfing that day, I was highly stressed. I was determined to go windsurfing in storm conditions. My body said to me, and I can still remember it, stop at the windsurfing shop, buy a helmet. I stopped at the windsurfing shop, I tried on the helmet, and I couldn't justify with a young family. I thought, well, do I spend it at my son Thomas? Do I spend it at my family? Or do I indulge here? And I thought, well, I'll buy it next time.
Mm.
There was no next time. I went out windsurfing, and the rest, as they say, is history. But what I learned from that, what the 50 different headaches taught me, every time that I didn't listen to my body, I would end up in a darkened room for hours or days on end. So it was like I created this world where I had one choice: listen to my body. I still fought it. I still tried to run software businesses, but gradually I fought it less, and I fought it less, and I fought it less. And it's like anybody. If somebody feels heard, they share more, and they share more, and they share more. Now, okay, 12 years ago, I started kinesiology, so I can look at neurotransmitters, and I can look at hormones, I can look at a whole range of things, and it's like this new toy, and you think it's marvelous. But the basic premise is when you start listening, you will hear. When you start from the beginning of acknowledging this trauma is affecting my life, despite what anybody tells me. It is not to knock anything to do with the medical care, because would I still be alive were it not for the medical care? No. But the medical care can only take you so far. What I describe is the healing gap, which is the difference between where conventional medicine can get you and where you know in your heart, your soul, and your body you can get to. And what I'm really advocating is saying, listen to that, know that, and then you'll hear the more subtle flows. And life is a really beautiful flow, even in the darkest trauma. There is beauty there. We just can't see it, because the biggest barrier to healing, I believe, is expectation. I should be better by now. I had somebody 3.5 years later who spoke to a friend of mine and said, "Has Ronald got a job yet?" I mean, I was struggling to survive, to get through each day, to the pain that I was going through, the dysfunction in my brain, the inability to communicate, the inability to function at any level. And it was like, has Ronald got a job yet? And therefore the shame that comes with that. Well, why haven't I got a job yet? Because nobody's coming along and saying, look, Ronald, you are doing everything you can do. This is not your fault.
You talk about shame, and I want to add that really interesting is to hear you talk about it, and to hear it as expectations and everything. The expectation, come on, I can do it. The expectations we put on ourselves can also create that shame that we can keep ourselves from moving forward. And I think that's really prevalent with a lot of people who have been sexually abused or trafficked. They carry that shame, and it's an embarrassment. And it's almost like, and I'm going to say me, and as part of this, come up with all these excuses as not to listen to our body, because our body was part of that experience. And so we get to that point where we want to like almost disassociate from our body. Do you have any suggestions of how important it is not to disassociate to reconnect with our body and listen to it. Otherwise, if we disassociate, we can't hear, correct?
Yeah. I know I was a victim of a sexual assault in circumstances. I was in India, 2019. I went out there to heal. My wife came with me, stayed there for 2 weeks. She went home, I stayed, had an amazing amount of support. I got sexually assaulted by a man. I'm a heterosexual male. And that man was a masseuse who I had paid in advance for these sessions. I was completely vulnerable. I was walking on two sticks. I had to have his hand to even get into the massage place. And so I'm surrounded, 30 degrees, Indian Ocean, beautiful location. And, you know, it's just the shame. How could I, as a male, be assaulted, be raped by another male? It's just like, it's just the disbelief. It's just well, it must be my fault. I mean, where else do you go? It must be my fault. I must have done something. I must have encouraged something. Now, the work that I am still doing, even today, and I right here today, I'm doing a thing called EMDR, rapid eye movement. And what we were handling today, and this is the synchronicity, this is the beauty that I discuss. I'm sitting here with a leaflet, and forgive the pronunciation because I don't know, I've only heard it today, but the Finkel method, I don't know how, you'll probably know how to say that.
That's great. That's great.
And I'm sitting here with, there is a person who wants to abuse. The person overcomes the thoughts that abusing is wrong. The person can get the child alone. The abuser overcomes the child's resistance. And I'm going, at 50 something, that was me. That is how I feel. That gives me hope, because there is the truth. I was not the perpetrator. I am the survivor. And to sort of complete the story, I didn't even mention this for 3 years to my wife. 3 years I held that inside. So I know. I just know. I know shame, humiliation, self-criticism, doubt. And I know that anybody listening can transcend whatever it is, because I know from my time in the rehab hospital, I was in a wheelchair, people couldn't talk, people had strokes. The list goes on and on. We used to listen to this one guy tell a story. It took him half an hour to tell a story I could tell in 1 minute. And we were all there for him. And the common theme was they had survived. They'd had families brought in, one person 4 times, that he was going to die. I said, did they bring them in to say that he might die? Or did they bring them in to say that he was going to die? And they said, no, they brought my family in to tell them that I was going to die on 4 occasions, and he was still alive. And what you get in that scenario, a 19-year-old Moroccan knocked off his bike, couldn't talk, couldn't move. What you get, again, is hope, humor, laughter, darkness, tears, pain, but you're alive. I'm alive. I've survived. And I know it's possible. And I know that these are the words I would have liked to hear at 29. These are the words I would like to have heard as I came out that masseur's place. A place that I would go back the next day and go, because I'd paid. And I couldn't understand, I just couldn't understand. I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand. And it just went round and round in my head. I can't understand. I can't understand. What is this? What have I done? And it can't be any coincidence that today of all days, talking to you, it comes out. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. You did. You did. You did. And I feel so humbled and so honored that you shared that with me. And I think that's really impressive to the fact that what you're saying here, and you said that this happened in your 50s, and the questions and everything that people don't understand, that that's what is actually happening when these events happen, especially from my experience with sexual abuse. We're trying so hard to comprehend what is going on at this moment that by the time we start to even begin to wrap our mind, the event's over. And there's that whole flight, fight, or freeze moment, and we're sitting there trying to figure this out. How is this possible that people don't understand? People who are not in that situation can't understand. And
Exactly.
a lot of our lawyers and people who are trying to defend people who have been abused just have no idea about that. And they play on that. They play on that. They play. Well, why didn't you get up and run away? Oh my God. Ronald, how would you have been able to get up and get away? You couldn't,
I couldn't.
and
I would have needed his help to even be able to achieve that.
exactly. And here you are relying on the predator to help you. Even, oh my God,
So
and
for me, I can relate to this sexual abuse as a child, where you are completely defenseless, because I was as defenseless as a child in that scenario. And yes, I can go and intellectually learn that neurologically my body was looking to survive. It shut down. It goes into freeze mode. I can understand that neurologically, but that's not enough. That's not enough for me to heal. I have to really go. I mean, my session today, I sit there with this loving man supporting me to deal with it, to a point where I can start to realize it's not me. It never was me. The perpetrator, this is what I found so helpful. There's a person who wants to abuse. As soon as you start to get to that point, you start to realize, oh my God. And then you start to realize that there is something bigger here of us coming together in these communities, because we are looking to support each other, to free this trapped energy, to say, yes, this happened to you, and no, it shouldn't have happened to you, but your life is not over. My life was not over in the rehab ward. It just wasn't. It's not over now. It's not over to the day that your last breath comes. And with that comes hope. And the most important word for me in rehab is a word that few people have heard, which is omnilateral. It means in every direction. So whatever direction you are being led, we resist things. We all know how we should eat. We know we need to eat more greens and more fruit. We know we need less alcohol, no cigarettes. Drugs aren't good for us. We know we need to be outside more. We know we need to reduce. We know all of these things. So don't tell me that people can't. How do I listen to my body? Well, you start by the things that your body is asking you. And what I'm saying is, look, here's 30 years of experience of continuing to listen. Now, I still had traumatic experiences, ones that I wouldn't wish on anybody, ones I couldn't even imagine happening. And yet, within me, the strength grows. the desire to share, the desire to help others, it just grows and intensifies. And as I said before this call, if this call helps one person, it's worthwhile. Because that's all we can do, is help one person at a time. And how in those moments of darkness, I would have loved somebody to reach out and say, Ronald, I'm with you. I am there. And yes, my spiritual belief is that person was with me. But we also need other human beings. We need that contact. We need that support. We need somebody to say, if you are feeling that trauma and that person does not feel it, it is still trauma to you. It is valid. It's the beginning of healing to say, I have been traumatized. It's not about being a victim or a survivor. It's about the fact that I have gone through trauma, and that is restricting my life in some direction. And when we look in all of our directions, we start to realize that we can shrink. Now, since the rehab, I still have issues with my walking. I've joined a choir. I'd never done. Couldn't sing a note before. I joined a community choir. We've given one Christmas concert. We're giving another one. I sea swim. I'd never ever sea swum all the way through winter, when it's snowing. And when I go sea swimming, people are trying. I'm walking into the sea with 2 sticks or 2 crutches, and people are looking at me. And then I go and swim half a mile, and they're just like, "What?" But then they talk to me, and I share, and so there is opportunity, and that I continue to say there is opportunity, and it is worth being with this trauma, receiving the help to process this trauma, because life and hope should sit together, not apart.
I just want you to see this. This is all my notes I have been taking, and I was going to ask you questions, and you answer them before I get to ask them. But I love it. You said something really important, and I want to make sure that we touch on that. Because I've talked to a lot of men who are dealing with their experiences being abused, excuse me, and they're still afraid of coming forward. And I try just to let them know it's not so much about having to share your story publicly, because I don't think everyone needs to do that. You have to tell your story to yourself. And you have to realize that and acknowledge it, like you're saying, in order.
You have to allow the truth to come in.
Right. And then you can get help.
Otherwise, the perpetrator wins.
Yes, again, they win again.
And it's not even the perpetrator, because what is the perpetrator? The perpetrator is a tortured soul. So the soul just remains in perpetual torment. You're not helping yourself. You're not helping your family. You're not helping your friends. You're not helping anybody. But we're conditioned to believe that I should just get on with it. I mean, 3 years I did not discuss it with anybody, including myself. It would go round and round and round. And because I couldn't handle it, I couldn't share it.
Oh, I completely understand. Mine was almost 30 years before I even was able to address it. And it took a 16-year-old boy to come into my classroom, because I was a teacher, to share his story before I even understood that I was basically talking to myself. And that's when it started to work for me, but me starting to understand that I had been ignoring listening to my body, because it gave many signs along the way. Hey, this isn't working right. Something's going on here. You're not listening to me. And I didn't take the time because, one, I think being a male, I thought that I wasn't allowed to talk about it. 2, I was too embarrassed to even present it to anyone. I did present it to my mother, and she slapped me and told me, must have been my fault. So I carried that all with me. And I think you talked about having a support system, which is really important. And sometimes I think we don't think we have that. So we keep shut down. And what I don't think people understand is people like you who are sharing your story are supporting others without even speaking with them.
Yeah.
Your energy is going out to everyone who's listening to it. Even and that's the thing that kind of blows my mind is the ripple effect we have that we don't even realize that we have.
I think that this is what it taught me. You know, I nearly died 2 years ago from sepsis, and I'm sitting in a wheelchair, and nurses are coming into or I'm lying unable to move my legs at all. Nurses are coming in and they're talking to me and they're asking me questions about nutrition or various elements. I used to get these two or three coming in and go, "What should I do?" You know, and it was just like I realized that if I in that state had something to give, you know, it's just like, again, I can't deny the hope. You know, it's just, even in that state I had something to give. So every single person, however they are being called to engage in the world, whatever physical or mental or emotional or any restrictions that they have value exactly as they are. And the only choice they've got is shrink inwards or go inwards to expand outwards, to be the person that they were destined to be. Trauma, we say, is bad, but trauma is experience. Trauma is an experience that we may not have wished, but I tell you what, I like the place I've arrived in. Did I want to get sexually abused? Did I want to go through those things? Of course I didn't. But do I prefer this version of me to where I was? Yeah, I do. Because unfortunately, childhood, we are conditioned into a way of thinking and a way of being. And the only way I know to break that is to really start listening to your body. And when you listen, and by listening, you act on it, you have to buy your windsurfing helmet that I didn't buy. Whatever that is for you, whether it's an apple today, whether it's a pause and a sit down and close my eyes, whether it's helping somebody across the street, whether it's sharing your story, whatever it is for you, you unique, beautiful, 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 beautiful human being, whatever it is, just give yourself permission. Just give yourself permission and see for yourself how your life changes. That's healing.
I love that. Give yourself permission. And and that it can go as simply as asking yourself, what's my favorite color? And your favorite color can change every day, but give yourself permission to say what your favorite color is. Just simple things like that can help you get into that listening more to what your body says and where you are at the moment. And I think one of the things about you that is so incredible to me is you always are in the present moment. You talk about things that happened in the past and you talk about what you want to go in the future, but you always bring us back to this moment right now happening between you and I. And that is a gift. Has there been any tools that you have that you could share that can help someone get back to the present?
I've been reflecting on this the last few days. I think there's maybe two simple. It's like when you have a toolkit that's really big, it's like, yeah, but none of that helps me. So for me, I'm looking at where I was in my darkest times, and that's who I'm talking to today. That version of myself, that version that is out there. And one of the most powerful tools I have found on that is that when you imagine you're in an airport, I mean, in Europe, I would use the analogy of trains, but they're not as big in the US. You're at an airport, and there's all these amazing places to go. Some you want to go to, some you don't, and you have a choice. And that airport is what is going on inside of your head. Those planes are going to take off. Those thoughts are going to happen, but you get a choice. Do I get on that? do I get on that plane or do I get on this plane? And you have always got that choice. Even in the darkest times, you have choice. Not choice as what's going to come into your head, but choice as to whether you get on that plane, whether you decide to go with that thought. Because I can tell you, if you get on that wrong plane, it's off here and it's off here and it's off here, and you're on a journey you don't want to do. So for me, it's like, can I just stay in this place? And if I decide to do that, I think one of the most simple things to start somatic, which is body healing, is just to put your hand or two hands. For me, I put one hand on my heart and I stop. And the world stills. My voice stills. Passion stills. I have nowhere but the present.
Beautiful. I want to go back and talk about something that you said, and you called it the what was it? The healing gap. Can you give a little bit more on that and what it is and how you look at it?
I think I've spoken to many survivors of many different things. And those that have been successful and those that have helped people to succeed have not been limited by a diagnosis and a prognosis, myself included. And one of the things that has evolved for me is understanding that there is a gap, sometimes a chasm between where you are left with whatever support you've had, whether it's conventional medicine, and sort of deep down where you know that you can be the person that you know that you are, the person, and you sort of know, but when we understand conventional medicine, they have limited time, limited budgets. There's only so far. If conventional medicine, conventional thinking will only get you so far. It will produce a conventional outcome, and in rehab, it's about 80% of where you were before that event happened. Now, to make extraordinary recovery, you have to do something extraordinary. And the first thing to do is recognize, well, hang on, they're believing that this is my future. I believe that this is my future. And if I hold that future, I don't have to obsess over it. But if I know, again, the body knows. My body might tell me something. And if my body tells me something, like, for example, my body, when the doctor in rehab never believed I'd walk again, by the time I left the rehab, he had in his head that it was yoga, mogul skiing, and horse riding. Very, very definitive. They didn't come from ego. They came from my body. And so far, I'm pretty well almost can do two of those within 2 years when my prognosis was never walk again. So understanding the gap, and it's not to blame the doctor. The doctor, having seen thousands of patients across more than a decade, is saying, on average, people get to 80%. So I'm trying to manage your expectations. We take it as a life sentence. We don't understand. The neuropsychiatrist after my brain, 3.5 years after my brain injury, said, and listen, I can still remember the words, nearly 27 years later, you may have to consider a more menial job. And behind me, just on my right-hand side, is my PhD. A PhD for somebody who had a brain injury. Would I have believed it in 1994, 95, 96? Even speaking to that doctor? No, I wouldn't. But it's possible because it's there.
Sorry about that. You got me there. That's amazing. I have to talk about this because I'm such an animal lover. I want you to talk a little bit about your horse and how your horse has helped you and your therapy and moving forward, and how your horse has helped you see what hope is.
I think the most interesting story with my horse, unfortunately, one died. I had two horses for 21 years, and the one that's alive, Chloe, is 30 years old. But what I found, what I learned over the years was like they live out 24/7 and they're in nature, and you know, and being a human, things come to me a lot slower than with than they come to a horse. So I go up and see them, and some days they would come over and I would feed them or give them an apple or whatever, and then other days they just wouldn't come over, and I just like, I mean, this process went on for weeks or months or probably years actually before I even noticed, and then it clocked that when I was angry, and I acknowledged I was angry, they were quite happy to just love me as I was, exactly as it was. When I was angry and didn't recognize that I was angry and tried to go near them, they just think you're not authentic, you're not real. They didn't need me to say a word. I mean, they could tell that from 100 yards away. That is how our energy radiates. So again, I bring it back to, if we have been through trauma and we deny that trauma, for those 3 years, I was in denial. I was, because, and no blame, no judgment, but I was in denial. And the horses and nature calls you out. So when you spend time in nature, again, you can't help but find yourself. And the joy and the love that I have for my horse, you know, when she whinnies, when I come round the corner and she whinnies, it's like there is nothing else in my life. There is no past or future. There's no trauma. There's no nothing. There's just her. I just like, aha.
Oh my God. I love that. And I think animals do that. You're so right. And it's important that we get out in nature and we're part of that. We connect back to nature with animals and trees and grass and all that stuff. And I think people, I know here in the States, we don't allow ourselves to do that. You know, unless you're a farmer or something like that, we get ourselves so busy and staying, you know, distracted with all these little things that are important. Now you're working on a new project. Are we able to talk a little bit about that
Of course,
and
we can
what it's
talk about that.
about?
Of course, we can talk about that. I suppose it really sort of came to me during the rehab. It had come to me before. My PhD um, is in recovery after a mild traumatic brain injury, and I think there's 55 million people around the world every year that have a mild traumatic brain injury and struggle to recover. But what the rehab hospital taught me was that the level of suffering, it's not 55 million, it's huge beyond that. And what I realized when I was in the rehab hospital, people kept coming up to me for advice. And they were coming up to me for advice was because I'd gone through a traumatic event that had taken me, 7 years to make a basic recovery. So that when I went through it again, it was like no big deal. When I spoke to people in the ward and said, is there anything good as to what's happened to you? Not one other person in all the time I was there could say, yeah, actually, this was amazing. Now, even when I was there, I could say that it was amazing. Take me back to my original traumatic experience, and I wouldn't be able to say that. So I really realized that there are basic principles and there's a basic understanding that I'm sort of collating to bring together in a program I call the Natural Blueprint. that is looking to help empower people to transform the trauma that they've been through to achieve post-traumatic growth, what I call post-traumatic growth, which is, for most people, they're trying to head backwards. I want my life back. I want to get, I want to be able to walk. I want to drive again. Everything is about going back, but we can't go back. Even if we had a TARDIS, it's not about going back. It's about moving forward. And this program really that I'm developing over the next few months and have really developed over the last 30 years is really to help people to achieve that. And it's early days, but I've reached out. I mean, I've interviewed so many people to find these consistent themes of what matters, what makes a difference to people. And yeah, that's the rest of my life is dedicated towards that and towards these type of people, and wanting to put it at different levels, because I know what it was like for me when I couldn't afford the thing that I wanted. So what I'm looking to do is make sure that there is, from affordable to however far one wants to go, but the basic principles and the basic premise is, if you're coming on board with this, here is the answer. Whether it's in a book I'll release, or whether it's in the basic course, that it has the principles by which you could recover, the ideas that I didn't know, that my conditioning would not allow me to get to.
That's amazing, and I love how you said that, because what came through to me is that anyone who's ever gone through any type of trauma, no matter what it is, at any age, at any time, wherever they are in their life, can go to this program that you're talking about and heal. It doesn't have to happen 2 weeks ago. It doesn't have to happen last year. If it happened when you were a child and you're now in your 40s, you could go to this program and find the healing that you need, because the hope is always there. And I love to tell
the hope is always there. And what I know is the conditioning is always there. And having spoken to hundreds, thousands of people, there's always a consistency. And the consistency is, the healing is not to do with the money. The healing is to do with the conditioning that doesn't allow them to actually hear the path. And that is where the support is required. That is the enabling process. That is the exciting process. It is just, and just beyond passionate about this, because I know what it was like, and I know how long I was trapped. And if you can reduce that healing gap, and reduce that healing gap in time, and reduce that healing gap in pain, and reduce that healing gap in effort, it's just like, hallelujah, heaven is on earth.
Love it. I cannot believe we're almost out of time. That just went by so fast. But I do want to ask you, what advice would you like to give to people who are listening or hearing this later, or if they share it with somebody else? What would you like them to share or talk about, to take away from this experience today?
That they matter, that you matter, that the trauma matters, that your life matters, and that it is to give yourself permission to do what it is that is the next step. I always go back to, and then it's to celebrate every success. And I go back, and I've shared this story with you, John Michael, to do with, when I couldn't move my legs and I couldn't wiggle my toes for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. And then one day, the 21st of September, 2022, I could come along and with my feet get out of the wheelchair and press my foot on the pedal bin and open the pedal bin that for months and months was a distant dream. The journey of healing is hundreds or thousands of steps, but it's celebrate each step that you move towards it. If that is putting your hand on your heart, celebrate that. If that is just not getting on one thought that, oh, this was my fault, I'm to blame, blah, 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 of just even getting on that plane and going, actually, no, I'm just going to get off. If each of us share what we have, the steps we are taking, we have transformed the world. Each of us together, collectively.
There is a message in there that I heard as you were speaking, that we all have our own unique way of healing. And we can't judge ourselves or compare ourselves to other people, because that's when we get our expectations out there, which could hamper our healing process. And by celebrating these little moments, which may not mean anything to anybody else, but to us, that's a victory. Wow.
And we can celebrate them over and over. I'm still celebrating every time I go to a hospital or somewhere that has a pedal bin. I walk over and I open it.
Oh.
And I go, yes. Over 2 years later, that is where healing comes from. It's not a 1 or a 0. I can walk, I can't walk. I can have a relationship, I can't have a relationship. I've got a job, I haven't. It's not that scale. It's the incremental steps. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. That is the point to take home. And if I celebrate the fact that I have achieved, I don't look at the chasm to where I want to be. I look at what I've achieved. The body knows what you want to do. It already knows that. But when you say, thank you, body, thank you, I'm honoring you, thank you. I couldn't wiggle my toes. I can now. It's like, oh my God, thank you. That is a step closer to the life that I dream of. That is a step closer to wholeness, to wellness, to everything that and I'm saying yes to that. And so again, I say yes to hope.
Ronald Howie, you are amazing. You're inspirational. And you talk on a language that everyone can understand. And I think you're touching lives. I know every time I talk to you, I feel moved and I see things differently. And I just want to thank you. Thank you so much for what you're doing. Thank you so much for being transparent. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Well, thank you, because it wouldn't be anything without you.
I appreciate it. Now